Hi there, guys. It's me, Pete, back again, reviewing Blade Runner 2049. Well, I have really been anticipating this particular movie. I mean, I'm a huge Blade Runner fan, first and foremost. I'm a sci-fi geek, and Blade Runner, when I was about 13 or 14, really was one of those films that had a big impact on me. And I watched it copious amounts of time. I must have seen it. It must have been one of my most watched movies, and it's one I was able to years and years later on DVD and when it's come out on Blu-ray, and the different versions have been over the years. It's interesting to keep going back to it and keep rewatching it. And I always find something different to see in it each time I watch it. And it's a very enigmatic movie. It's a very slow movie, and it's not to everyone's taste, but it did develop a huge following. When it first came out, it wasn't hugely successful, but over time, it's become very beloved by a lot of people. Not just me, but by sci-fi fans, by filmmakers, and the sequel or the prospect of a sequel, it made me extremely happy and extremely worried at the same time because you want to sort of not ruin the old Blade Runner, because the old Blade Runner to me was one of the best ever one-shot movies, and by one shot I mean it's just one movie, it's just one character, it's just one story, one and done, and there isn't any more. There's no trilogy, there's nothing else to tell. The Blade Runner story is Blade Runner, and once that story's done, that's the story done. And that was my way of thinking about Blade Runner for a long time. But when I did hear that they was going to do a sequel to Blade Runner, I still couldn't help but be quite interested. I wasn't too keen on the idea of Ridley Scott doing it because some of his films over years have been very variable in the quality. He's not. He still makes some great movies now and again, like he did The Martian, was really good. But I don't think he's really at the top of his game where I really wanted him to be doing a sequel to Blade Runner, because I just sort of feel like, I don't know, I would rather have seen someone new come on. And they did. They got someone new to do it, and this was a point where I started to get really excited because the director who did this movie, Denis Villeneuve, I can't say his name. I really need to learn how to pronounce his name because he is a really interesting filmmaker. He did a sci-fi movie called Arrival that came out last year, and I absolutely adored that movie. I've also seen some of his other films that I did also like, and I thought he was a very competent, very good director. But the Arrival film that he did, the sort of sci-fi it was, and the way that he brilliantly constructed and brilliantly shot that movie, made me even more excited for Blade Runner. So I was really anticipating it, and then when the trailers dropped, I was hugely into it. I mean, I'm more looking forward to this than the new Star Wars, to be honest. Even though Star Wars is my #1 film of all time, #1 film series of all time. This particular film, this Blade Runner, the way that it showed on the trailers, the things that they looked like they were doing with it, it's one of those things where all the stars seem to be aligning. I love Harrison Ford, especially coming back to play Deckard. I love Ryan Gosling in these kind of roles. He's not always good, but this seemed like a really good role for him to do. And also, the other thing is that I can't say enough about the guy who's a cinematographer, who's Roger Deakins, who is my favourite cinematographer of all time, favourite director of photography. His movies are immaculate. If you ever see a Roger Deakins movie, you can be sure visually it's going to impress. And so when I knew he was doing the cinematography, I was sold. I was just so confident that he was going to do a good job. But as we know from being a cynical fan of watching movies and being extremely excited for movies over a long period of time now, you know that some of the time you can get really excited for a movie, you can go in and your expectations mean that you really don't enjoy it, or you think it's terrible, or it ends up just being a flat out bad movie. So over years and years, I do try not to get myself too excited. That, and I have a lot of things going on in my life now, so it's not like I'm sitting there every day counting the days till Blade Runner came out. But still, I was really looking forward to it, but cautiously so, because I have been burned a lot of times by movies like this in the past, and it's really nice to be in a situation like this movie where you go and see it and you're like, actually, despite my super high expectations and my super love for the first film, should actually mean I don't like this movie, or mean I'm going to be critical of it or slag it off or whatever or not enjoy it. Actually, this is one case where if you like the original Blade Runner and hold it with a very special place in your heart like I do, you will like this movie even more, and you will actually probably really like it because it is true sequel to Blade Runner. They have done this. They have made it very similar style, very similar tone and feel. It feels like the same world. albeit 30 years later. The way that it's directed, the way that it looks, again, the cinematography is amazing, as I expected it would be, but the original Blade Runner in its own right was absolutely amazing as well in its cinematography, and even people who aren't a huge fan of that movie would have to admit that visually it looked great, and this one also manages to go toe to toe with that, so that is one huge thing to start off with. But the other good thing about it is that it takes its time and it is a slow paced movie. They haven't actioned it up. They did show a trailer that made it look like it was going to be loads of action and car chases, and I sort of thought, well, that's fine if they have done that with Blade Runner. I'm not going to, cry over it. I mean, a lot of movies nowadays have to be more action focused because people don't want to see slow moving sci-fi films. I mean, unfortunately, this is what happened with Star Trek. I know a lot of Star Trek fans hated the J.J. Abrams movies because they were more action and more fighting and stuff and not as much philosophy. But if that's what sells, that's what people want to see, you can't blame studios for going that direction, especially if it proves to be successful. So, if they had done that with this, I wouldn't have really held it against it, but it would have felt a little sad because Blade Runner is one of the really truly great sci-fi masterpieces, and the book that it's based on is also a sci-fi. I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece or a classic. I mean, some people regard the book as "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" as being like a masterpiece classic, and I wouldn't say it was. I say I read the book, I really enjoy it. It's a good sci-fi book. I like Philip K. Dick books a lot, and I think it's a good one. But I think that it's one of the rare occurrences where the film has actually improved on the book, and the film is actually a sci-fi classic. The book not quite so much, but both are very, very good true sci-fi things. And this is another one of those. It is a continuation. It is a proper sci-fi movie. You aren't in for a Terminator movie or a Star Wars movie here. It's definitely got its roots in the original Blade Runner lore and in that tone and in that sort of way of setting things up. And I think that is incredible. I was blown away by the fact that he'd managed to do that because it's so difficult nowadays to make an artistic movie with a huge budget. It rarely, rarely, rarely happens where they just say, right, you do this and we'll just let you do it. Even the original Blade Runner, Ridley Scott ran into so many problems with people who didn't understand his vision for the film, who wanted to interfere with it and were concerned because it was costing a lot of money and it was taking a lot of time to make it. And he really was up against it, and to some extent Blade Runner suffered. I mean, it's a wonderful film I love, but it does have some flaws and some issues, and that's probably because his vision wasn't quite what he wanted. The original version that came out in 1982, he then went back and redid as the director's cut in 1992, and then he redid the final cut version. So he's managed to trim it down and change it to make it what it was. But it seems like he wasn't able to fully execute his vision in all its totality, I don't think. Whereas this director seems like he's been able to, but really he's only been able to do that because of how Blade Runner has changed cinema. I mean, I think it was a film that sort of has shown that audiences do sometimes crave films that don't spell everything out, that you do have to engage your brain, you do have to think of it, because even though Blade Runner 1982 wasn't a hit, it grew to be a huge hit and a hugely beloved film to a lot of people over time. So the studio were, wise enough to understand that actually there is an audience for this, and audiences do like these kind of movies. But they were still done an awful big chance on making it so true to that original one, because in doing that you're also kind of isolating the 70 or 8% of other people who don't like Blade Runner, didn't watch Blade Runner. So it's unusual, really, that you get that this long after. You would have thought, looking at it on face it, this would have been something more like a soft reboot of Blade Runner. And it isn't. It is a sequel. It's not any kind of a reboot. It's a straight up sequel. Um, Although there's more going on and there's more happening in here than the original Blade Runner, and I think that it's a better film for that in a lot of ways. Overall, I still prefer the original, but because of just it was the original, you're not going to be able to best that because it was the original one that laid the foundation for this one, and there was nothing like that before. It was, I mean, this film is a beautiful looking sci-fi movie, but there are a lot of beautiful looking sci-fi movies since then that have taken inspiration from Blade Runner. The live action Ghost in the Shell was also a beautiful looking film. It's another one that was heavily inspired by Blade Runner. So that was the granddaddy of it all. So you can't really beat that. But I think that in an interesting way, he didn't really try to. He just tried to make his own movie in that style, and it does go in its own direction as well. We don't want a beat-for-beat remake of the first one. That is completely pointless. We want to see some of those little nuggets taken on, expanded on. The big enigma at the central of the first Blade Runner, spoiler, is, it's not even a spoiler because it's not really answered, but is this whole question of, is Deckard a replicant or is he a human? And people split down the middle on it, and Ridley Scott has said he's a replicant, Harrison Ford said he's a human, and with this movie, there was always that chance that they were going to sort of let a cat out of the bag and come out and say, oh, he's a human, or oh, he's a replicant. Even when the trailers came out, people were saying, from the trailer, they were saying, oh, he's obviously a human then because he's 30 years older than this. And replicants only live for 4 years, so he's obviously a human. So it's, but no, it's not. It's not that at all. When you watch the movie, it does and introduces certain ideas and certain things that make it perfectly possible for him still to be a replicant. And it doesn't really tell you which he is or whether he isn't. It just deepens the mystery a bit further. And that isn't the point of the movie. The point of the movie is something completely different from that. But it's interesting that they were able to sort of preserve within this film that little enigma, because that is the central cool thing about Blade Runner, is what is Deckard. And it's like David Lynch said about when he was doing Twin Peaks about Laura Palmer, and he was saying like everyone wanted us to, give the game away. Who killed Laura Palmer? Because that's the mystery at the centre of Twin Peaks, was who killed Laura Palmer. That's what everyone wanted to know. Everyone wanted to know. But as soon as he answered it, the show sort of died, because he said we should never have answered it, because that was the thing that got people interested and got people talking, and you don't want to give an answer. And I think that while that can lead to some people being unfulfilled and find it really annoying, other people like me love the fact that it's enigmatic. It allows you to draw your own conclusions, as different people will think different things. And I think it gives you enough suggestions that you can look at in either way. It isn't the kind of film where it's just a shoddy piece of filmmaking where they couldn't be bothered. Like, there are certain little clues that are definitely there to hint at either thing. This one, I think, it explains more, and it doesn't have as many unanswered questions. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, there's a lot to think about, but I think you get to the end of this one pretty much knowing everything you need to know. All the questions you have are pretty much answered, and it's a little bit more neatly wrapped up in a bow at the end, which is nothing wrong with that. But that's the only thing I would say will put it slightly down from the original Blade Runner for me, is the original one did have this wonderful enigmatic aspect to it, and this one is very much like it's all kind of done, that the real central dilemmas of the movie are answered, and are answered definitively. There's no sort of ambiguity about it. It's very much like, this is what it was, and that's what it is. But across the board, this film was fantastic, and fantastic in the acting, in the script, in the direction. The music was a brilliant callback to the original while still doing its own thing. This was just like a masterpiece in what to do, in a way, when you're confronted with this issue of, do you make the film? How do you make a film 30 years on that's so beloved? But it should be an impossible task. It should have been a film that just flopped under the weight of all its ambition and was too ambitious, or just didn't know what it was. But it's actually incredibly brilliant, and I think in some ways you could say it's better than the first one. I certainly think people who had some issues with the first one will like this more. I mean, there's a whole variety of people who have ideas on Blade Runner. Some people love it. Some people like aspects of it, like they like the look of it, but they don't really like the story, or they didn't like certain things about it. For people who sort of like some aspects of the old Blade Runner, but weren't totally sold on, say, the story, or the emotion, or something like that with the characters, I think this one does go further to make you have an emotional reaction. It's a bit more emotionally involved. It's a bit deeper. In a way, it explores more. And I think that some people might like it more because of that, for that reason. Overall, when it got to the end and everything said and done, I still preferred the original, but there were certainly moments where I was like, this is actually better as a film. It's more solidly constructed and more coherent than the original one. So I'm going to say it's a 10 out of 10. I'm going to say go out and watch it. I mean, if nothing else, for the brilliant, wonderful cinematography that Roger Deakins did, because really he is a master and it looks gorgeous. So even if you didn't really enjoy the film that much, you could still say you've seen an amazing looking movie that really draws you in. This isn't just a film of style of the Southerns. It's not like a Transformers or something where it just looks good for 5 minutes and then you're bored. You're constantly intrigued by the look of this movie because it's constantly doing different things with the visuals. It's not just the same thing rinse and repeat for 2 hours. It's not just no load of CGI. It is, artistically speaking, one of the best looking films ever been made. And yeah, I absolutely love it. And it has left some seeds or some possibilities for a further movie, whilst being its own thing. It hasn't really set up a sequel as such. But after this has been now been sort of revitalised, the whole Blade Runner thing, it would be nice maybe to have another movie. God knows what it would be about, but there's definitely more stories I think you can tell in this world and with this kind of subject matter. Um, High praise has to go to Harrison Ford, who didn't phone it in, who did a legit, really good performance, just like The Force Awakens. Like, he didn't just turn in like a half-assed performance. And it says something again, because just like with Star Wars, he hated the original Blade Runner, and he didn't like making it, and he didn't talk to Ridley Scott for years, and it never seemed possible he would ever want to come back and do a Blade Runner sequel. It just didn't seem like it was even on the cards because of how bad they got on in that movie. But I think, the years have gone by, they've sort of, apologised and amended their ways, and then he's sort of come back, and his performance as Deckard was remarkable. It really did improve upon what you knew about the character in the first one, and actually it's one of his best performances in years. So really, it was good that he wasn't just, you know, doing it for the paycheck or something. He was really dedicated to making his film good, and I think he believed in the script and believed it was a good idea. Just like The Force Awakens, I think he also believed in the script and thought it was a good idea. So I'm really, really pleased that he's actually done a few roles now where, he's actually doing something good, because a lot of the time Harrison Ford is a bit shit nowadays. So he is good in that particular film. He's good in Force Awakens. So overall, I also think Ryan Gosling, like I say, was very, very well cast, and he did do a really good job. Uh, he had a very difficult role to play, and not giving any spoilers away, but the emotional journey he goes on, and the subtlety with which he sort of expressed that. A lot of it's in his emotions, and Blade Runner is always about not what is said, but what isn't said. What someone doesn't say or doesn't do, or a look here or a glance there can infer a lot. You've got to infer and imagine and intuit a lot of stuff. It's not really spelled out for you. This movie spells some things out a little bit more, but you still have to kind of latch on to what's going on yourself, and that might be another reason why some people don't like it. But I'm not going to start being snobby and saying, oh, some people just don't get it. No, plenty of people get it, they just don't like it. It's just people's taste. It's a taste thing, not an intelligence thing. Uh, I'm not going to be so snobby and say, oh, I'm so intelligent, I understand it, you just don't get it. No. Plenty of people completely get it, they just don't like it. It's not their thing. It doesn't float their boat. So if you like the original Blade Runner, I'd say definitely go and see it. If you didn't like the original, I'd say still go and see it, because it's a beautiful looking film. And if you were sort of this way, that way on the original, like you like some bits and you didn't like others, again, I think you'll have a better time with it than the first Blade Runner, because in some of those key ways it has improved certain things that maybe turned you off the first time around. So that's my very long rambling review. I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. Absolutely love it. Masterpiece. Best film I've seen this year. I don't expect it to be beaten. Star Wars Episode 8 will have to be something extremely impressive to knock that one off the #1 spot for me. So, I will see you again soon for another review. Thanks for watching. Bye.